Welcome back everyone for part 5 of our video tutorial series on making a platformer game in Unity. In this video we're going to be finishing up our first set of animations by adding an attack animation into our game. And we'll also be looking at how we can use animation events to trigger things to happen when we reach a certain point in an animation. And this will conclude our first player animation controller that we're setting up. We're actually going to be setting up 2 others to handle using a melee weapon and using a ranged weapon as well. This one is when we're unarmed that we're setting up at the moment. So let's jump right in and look at how we can accomplish this. So here we are in Unity looking at our project as we have it so far. We currently have our player able to move and jump, and we've set up some animations for idling, walking, and jumping. So first thing we want to do is go ahead and set up another animation for attacking. Now in this controller, this is all the animations that we're going to have attached to our player when he's unarmed. So he doesn't have a weapon, and when he's unarmed we're going to not allow him to attack or do any damage. But we do still want to have an animation, and we're going to look at how we can use an animation event to put some text on the screen just to kind of tell the player that they can't attack because they do not currently have a weapon. So let's make the animation first. So we're just going to click in on our player up here in the hierarchy so we have him selected, and then we can go to our animation window here and let's add a new one. So if we drop down the drop down here that shows all of our current animations, we can hit create new clip. We're going to call this player attack unarmed. And let's make sure that gets put into our folder here. So we're in the assets and we want to go to player animations, put in our player animation folder. And let's hit save. Okay, so now we have player attack unarmed set up here. And what I really want is just one frame here that just shows him kind of with his arms up, kind of giving us that look like, what do you want me to do? I don't have a weapon here. So let's go in and find a sprite that works for that. So we're going to go to our asset folder and find our sprite sheet. And let's just go through and find the sprite here. I'm just going to use this one here. This is actually one of our jumping sprites. But I'm going to go ahead and just use that here as well, because it's kind of got his arms up, kind of like, hey, what do you want me to do here? So I'm going to drag that in and drop it right here at the beginning of my timeline. And then I want it to hold this for a certain amount of time. So what we can do is we can go over here to, let's say we do this for maybe a second. So we can move our playhead over here to a second, right click, and we can add a key. And this key will copy over whatever was in the key before it when we add it. So now I've got a starting and a stopping key here at a second. So this animation ought to last for 1 second when it's played. And we can change the length of this. A second might be too long of a time for us to be holding this pose depending on whatever else is going on in the game. But we'll just set it there and we can tweak it some more later. So we've set up a simple animation where he's just going to put his hands up like this when we push the attack key when he doesn't have a weapon and he's unarmed. Alright, now that our animation is set up, we need to go put that into the animator controller. So I'm going to go to the animator, and I'm still clicked in on the player so it shows his currently assigned animator. And you see here now that player unarmed attack is sitting right here in our animator controller. So I'm actually going to move this over a bit. Alright, so this player attack unarmed is also going to be connected to our any state button here, because it doesn't matter what state we're in. I'm going to go ahead and let him attack. So I'm going to right click any state, make transition. I'm going to go to player attack unarmed. And I'm going to right click player attack unarmed to make a transition back to my player idle. So basically then, whenever we push the button to trigger an attack, it'll interrupt whatever other animation is currently happening and it'll play this animation. So let's click here on the transition arrow going from any state to player attack unarmed. And if you remember, what we want to do here is go into our settings and uncheck the can transition to self. Pretty much whenever I go from any state, I uncheck that so that we can't accidentally get stuck in some sort of jittery looking little loop. So that's off of there. Then we have to set a condition for this to happen. So we're going to go over here to our parameters. We're going to hit the plus key here to add a new parameter, and this time I want a trigger. So a trigger is something that we can set, and it triggers the event to happen, and then it resets itself right away so that we're able to trigger it again. So it's a little different than a Boolean because we don't have to reset it between true and false. We'll just trigger it. It'll go true for the frame that we trigger it in, and then it'll go right back to false again. This is a good attack animation type parameter to use a trigger. So we'll just call this attack. And then in our transition from any state to player attack unarmed, the condition we want is attack. And that's just a trigger, so we don't have to set anything else. Okay, so as soon as we get the attack trigger, it will transition to player attack unarmed. Now we're going to go to the transition back to idle. And this one here we want to use exit time. So we don't need any other conditions to happen. As soon as our animation is done playing, we want it to transition right back down into player idle. So I don't have to do anything extra here. It's set up already to use an exit time. We don't necessarily need any other settings to change here. We could change the amount of time it takes to blend between the two, but I think that's probably fine for now. We'll see how that looks. So we've made the animation, and now we've gone into the animator and we've set the animation here. We've hooked it into our other animation, so we're ready to go. So let's go into our script here now, and let's set up our controls so that we can actually trigger the attack to happen. So out here in Visual Studio, we need to now set up a control for us to trigger this attack. That's going to happen in our update function here because we want to constantly be checking to see if we've had any kind of a button press. So let's go down somewhere in here and take care of that. I think we'll just put it down here at the bottom under everything we're doing for jumping. So let's just kind of make some room here. We want to make sure we're still inside of our update function so that this happens. And we're just going to use an if. We're going to go to our input. We're going to get a button down, which will detect the button press for the frame that it was pressed. The button we want is fire 1. That's one of the built-in button controls, and that has to be inside of quotes. So there we go. So if we get fire 1, whichever button's mapped to that in our input manager, and we'll take a look at that here in a minute and see what button we want to use, then we will be triggering that animation. So to trigger the animation, it's much the same as we are triggering animations here. We're going to go to the anim and we're going to set the trigger. So this time it's anim, and what we want to do is set a trigger, and the trigger we want is attack. So it's very similar to the other parameters that we set from our script, except with a trigger, you just give its name, and it's kind of like pulling that trigger. We don't have to give it a value. And the other ones here, like from setting a bool, we have to give it a false or a true. When we set the speed, we set it a float number. This one here, we're just going to set the trigger. Alright, so that's all we need to really do to make it trigger that animation. Let's save our script and go back into Unity, and let's look in our input manager. So to get to the input manager again, you go to Edit on the top menu bar, and then you go to Project Settings, and the first one on the list is Input. And let's kind of collapse that one. Here's Fire 1. This is the one that I just used. Currently it's set up with a button for the left control key. We're using spacebar for jumping here, so there's a couple of choices we have. We could make jump happen on up arrows and W keys instead, and then put fire on the spacebar, or we could leave our spacebar for jump and then just assign a different key for our firing. So we'll just leave left control for now, that's fine. But if you want to change it to something else, you just click here and you type in whatever button you want to use. Right? And if you want to have two buttons, you can assign an alternate positive button. This is set up for mouse 0, which is the left mouse button as well. Not really a mouse-driven game, so I'll leave it there for now, but this would be the place where you go in and set up a different key if you wanted maybe the left control and the right control. Let's do that. Let's set this up to right control. So I just type right, CTRL. You know you got it right if you click away from it and it doesn't take the text away. That means it recognized it. So now left or right control buttons will cause me to fire. I guess this gives our left-handed and right-handed people a chance to pick what side of the keyboard they want to be pushing on. So we've got fire one all set up with our control keys. Alright, so if we save this now and we go in and play our game, we should be able to trigger that attack animation. Let's take a look. Okay, so we're still able to move back and forth, and if I push my fire button, I got my animation. You can see down there in the animator window when I push one of the control keys, that animation plays, it holds, and then it automatically transitions back to player idle. Okay? And if I'm walking and do it, it automatically transitions. Of course, I keep moving, so that's a bit interesting. If I'm jumping and I do it, you won't see it because I'm using the same animation there. So that's fine there as well. Okay, so that's got our animation tied in and working when we push our buttons, and it's transitioning properly. The next thing I want to do is when this animation for attacking happens, I want to have that animation trigger an event. And the event it's going to trigger is a function in my script. So I want to put on the screen here, we're going to put a canvas out here, and I want to put a little text box up here that we can send messages to the player through. And I just wanted to send a message about how we don't have a weapon and we can't attack. So that takes a few things to do here. First, we have to make a canvas in our scene. So we're going to go up here in our hierarchy and right-click. We're going to go to UI, Canvas, and we'll go over all the UI more in depth in a different installment of this series. But for now, we're just going to set a canvas up. Just leave all the default settings. Right-click your canvas in the hierarchy and go to UI Text, which will add a text box as a child of the canvas. And then let's just double click the canvas here so we can see it out in the scene view. Remember, the canvas will draw as a big huge rectangle off to the side of our scene. My scene is actually right down here in this tiny little corner of it. This will automatically size itself to overlay our camera. As a matter of fact, right now there's a text box right here in the middle, and if you can see it, there's a real faint kind of gray text here. It says new text already in the center of my camera. Let's go ahead and change the color of that to something else so that we can see it a little better. There we go. Let's try like that bluish color there. Now you can see the text there. I'm going to go ahead and move this box to where I want it to be. So I'll probably put it somewhere up here and just make it a little bigger by dragging out the corners. I'm going to center it on the X by going into the rect transform and just setting the X to 0. And then we can center the text by going to the alignment. So I know I went through that really fast. Like I said, we'll go into this more in depth later. But what I did was I just used my rect tool, which is right up here at the top in the toolbars. That allows me to position and change the size of my boxes just by grabbing things. And then I went and changed the text color by going into the color picker here and clicking and picking a new color. Next thing I want to do is make this text a little larger. So if we go next to font size here, we get a little two-headed arrow that goes left and right. I can click, hold, and drag to make my text bigger or smaller. So let's make it a little bit bigger. We don't want it to be huge here because we might want to put a longer message here at some point. Let's maybe put it at a 25 for now and see how that looks. And then let's go ahead and drag this box so it's a little bit wider so we can use most of the top of the screen. We put the rest of our UI and we'll have to look to make sure we're not going to collide with any other UI elements in our scene. But for now, we'll just put that text up here where the player can see it. I think that color is fine for now. And then we just are going to name this text here. So I'm going to click it once here in the hierarchy, then click it one more time so I can edit it. You could also go up here to the top of the inspector and edit it there as well. I'm just going to call this my message text. And then we're going to access this text from our script and change its message. So for now I don't need it to say anything, so let's just clear out any placeholder text in that text box here. This is where we go to change the text. I'm just going to clear that out because we're going to do that through our script. Alright, so let's go into our player script here, and let's set up a link to this text box and put a function in here that we want to call when attack key is pressed. So the first thing we want to do is add a link to that text. So let's add another variable up here to the top. We want it to be public so that we can assign this out in the inspector. And we want this to be type text. Now you notice as I type text in, it does not give me the text. Alright, it doesn't know what this is. It says it doesn't exist in the current context. That's because to use UI scripting, we have to import that up here in our usings. So I'm going to make a new using statement up here. And this is going to be Unity engine.ui. And what that'll do is that'll tell Visual Studio here to grab all the UI built-in functions and methods in its library and to give access to those to the script here. So now that I did that, you can see text is now recognized, and it says default graphic to draw font data to the screen. So now we can use that data type, and let's give it a name. This is our message text, and we'll assign that out in the inspector here in a minute. Alright, next thing we want to do is we want to write a function that we can call when our attack animation is playing. So we're going to go down here to the bottom of our update function and make room for a new function. Remember, you can't put a function inside the body of another function, so void update ends right here. So let's make a new function here. This will have a void return type, and we're just going to call this unarmed attack. And unarmed attack is going to send a message up to our message box there. So let's make another function for sending messages here as well, because we're probably going to want to send other messages perhaps at different times in our game. So we might as well have a function that can receive a message and an amount of time to display that message on the screen, and then we can just make use of that later as well. So let's make another function here too as well. Void, let's say display message. And this is going to need to bring in a string parameter that we'll call message. And then let's bring in a float parameter for display time. And what that'll do then is that will allow us to send a message that we want to display and to tell this function how long in seconds we should allow that message to stay on the screen. So what we'll do here now is we will put the code in here for displaying the message. So we made this variable up at the top here, message text. That's a text variable. So we're going to use that. We're going to say message text dot text. That gets me to the actual text that's being displayed in the text box. So message text variable here is the entire text box and all its properties. The text dot text is just the text. So we're going to set that equal to our message. And text is a string. So we're going to fill it with a string here from this message that we pass in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call yet another function which is going to clear our message, our display message. So we're going to clear our message text out with that. So let's make yet another function. Well, the function turned into 3 here, didn't it? And this is going to be called clear message. So clear message, what it's going to do is it's just going to clear our text back out. So we're just going to say message text dot text, and this time we're going to set it equal to empty quotes. So quotes, quotes, that'll just wipe out any text that's in there and make it go away. So that's what we're going to do there. So display message is going to call clear message after a delay. So to do that, we're going to use an invoke command. So we're going to say invoke. An invoke command allows you to call a function in the future. So it's like we're setting up a future call here. that will get put into the computer's memory, and it'll invoke it when the time clock gets to the right spot. So first we have to give it as a string the method name. So that's clear message. So you got to type that in exactly like we made our function down here. And then we put a comma in, and we tell it a amount of time as a float. Well, that's going to be our display time that we pass into this function. So we're going to use display time. And what this will do now is it'll put the text here, and then it'll set a callback for clear message in however much time that we specify. So if we say 1 second, we put a 1.0 here, it'll call it in a second, and it'll clear it out. So we'll kind of walk back through this here in a little bit to help you get the flow of it all, but that's the basic setup. So then under unarmed attack now, we're ready to call display message. And then display message will invoke and call clear message and clear the text back out. So let's go ahead and call display message. And then we have to send it its two parameters here. So we are going to send a message. So let's put a message here, and the message will be I am unarmed and can't attack. So we'll do something like that. And I got to spell unarmed correctly here, it looks like. Unarmed. There we go. So we're going to display that message. And then we have to put a comma in here because it also needs an amount of time to display that message. So let's put it up for 1 second. Let's say 1.0f for float. So that'll cause it to show that for 1 second and then disappear. This can be changed if we need to. Alright, so let's save this, and we have to go out into Unity now and tie in our display message text variable to the text box that's on the screen, and then we should be ready to do an animation event which will call unarmed attack for us when the animation is playing. So, saving the script, going back out to Unity. So let's click back on our player in the hierarchy, and let's find the script, and you see now there's this variable here called message text. It says none text because we haven't assigned it. So I'm going to just grab my message text right here and drag and drop it down here in the message text. Now my script knows to send text to this text box, which is right here on the screen, and it will use the font size and the color and that I had set. I think one more thing I might do here is tell it, let's make this a little deeper, and yeah, right now if we overflow it horizontally, it's going to wrap it. If we go overflow vertically, let's go ahead and set that to overflow. That way our text won't get cut off ever. And we'll just see if our font size is going to work for that size of the sentence. Alright, so we're all set up to display a message here. But our function that we just wrote, our function unarmed attack here, is not being called from anywhere yet. And we're actually going to call that from our animation using what's called an animation event. So let's go back to Unity again. And let's go to my player, and then down here in the animation, we can go to our player attack unarmed. So here's our animation. Now we can actually set an animation event here. So right here, we have an event bar. Okay, this is like our keyframes and our animation frames. Up here, there's an event bar. So I can right-click up here and add an animation event. I can also add an animation event by taking the playhead to the time where I want it to start and clicking this button right here, the add event. So either way works. So I'm going to put this at just about 0.05 seconds. So shortly after the animation starts playing, I put the event. I click in on this blue. Over here in the inspector, you see it says animation event, and it says function, no function selected. So I'm going to drop that down, and I'm going to select the function. So here's unarmed attack. So I'm going to go ahead and select that function. And now when we play this animation, so when it's triggered, when it gets to this point, it's going to execute this event, which is going to call the unarmed attack function. And then it's going to trigger off the chain of events of displaying the message and then clearing the message. So let's save our scene here, and let's go back to our animator so we can kind of see what's happening there, and let's hit play and see if this works the way that we want it to. Okay, so I'm going to hit one of my attack buttons, and you see that it put the message up there. So, and 1 second doesn't seem to be very long. If I wasn't looking for it, I wouldn't know what it's there. But you notice that it's showing up and it's disappearing every time I hit attack. So let's go in and just lengthen that time slightly. So instead of 1 second, let's give it maybe 2 seconds. Save that. Let's test that out real quick. Alright, let's test see if 2 seconds is better. That does seem better. Alright, so he's kind of shrugging at us, putting his hands up like, what do you want me to do here? I don't have a weapon to attack with. Alright, last thing we should probably do just to finish off our little attack sequence here is we don't want the player to be able to spam this attack over and over and over again. We do want to have some control over how often we can attack. So let's go back into our script and add that one last piece in here. So we're going to go back here to our update function where we're doing our attack key, fire1 calling attack. Let's also make sure that we put some sort of an attack delay in here as well. So whenever we launch an attack, we want it to wait a little while before it attacks again. So let's actually put a variable up at the top here. This is going to be a public float. We're going to call this attack delay. This is going to be the amount of time in seconds that we want it to wait before it can attack again. So we're going to have that set up in the inspector. And then what we'll do is we will go down to where we are calling our attack here. And let's put an AND statement in here. So this is now a compound conditional statement using an AND. So if we get the fire1 button pressed down this frame, and if time dot time, so the current time in the game clock, if that is greater than, and we're going to have another variable here called last attack time as well. So we'll have to put that in a minute here. Last attack time, so we have to make that variable plus attack delay. Then we'll go ahead and allow it to attack. So let's make this last attack time variable here real quick. Back to the top. This doesn't have to be a public float, so actually let's just kind of hide that from the inspector. We don't need to see that. So this will be last attack time. Okay, so we got last attack time here. So what we're going to do here then is when we hit our fire button, we're saying, hey, if we got the button and the time on the game clock, time.time, if that is bigger than the last time we attacked, plus our attack delay, then go ahead and attack. And then the only other thing we have to do here is add in another line in our function. So if we do attack, we want to record the time we did that. So we're going to say last attack time equals time.time. And that will store the last time we attacked. So let's say that first time we attack, last attack time is going to be 0. So it's just going to go right away. Because our attack delay probably would be like maybe a second here. Something like that. Okay? So what we'll do here is when we do attack, though, the first time, it will record that time. So let's say we attack at 10 seconds in on the game clock, and we have a 1 second attack delay. Well, if we try to attack right away again, time.time, if it hasn't gone at least 1 second ahead, the last attack time at 10 plus an attack delay of 1 would be 11. So the time clock would have to get to 11 seconds before it would allow us to attack again. And this gives us control over attack rates. And we can set different attack delays for different types of attacks once we get into this a little bit further. We may have to do a little bit of a change up here on our attack delay based on if we're in unarmed mode or melee mode or ranged mode. So we'll see how that goes as we get further into it. But this should allow us not to spam our attack key. So let's save that. We just have to go out into Unity here now and go to our player, and then in his script in the inspector we have attack delay. Let's go ahead and put in, let's just give it maybe a 3 second delay here. We'll do 2 seconds, I guess, because that's how long we're going with the message. So we can't spam this, so to give us the message, we want to make sure that message has a chance to clear out before we send it again. So we'll put it at 2 seconds. So if I hit play now, and I hit my key here, it says I'm unarmed and can't attack. And if I keep trying to spam it, nothing happens until after that message goes away. And there we go. So that keeps us from spamming the key. And that will set us up for other types of attacks in the future, which it actually matters a little bit more if how often we let them swing their sword or shoot their gun. Well, there we go. This is where we're going to end this video tutorial. We've done a whole lot in here actually. We've learned how to set up a simple attack animation or a non-attack animation as the case may be. We've learned how to do an animation event by having the animation file itself call a function in our script. We've also taken a real quick look at how to add a canvas to our scene and a text box and how to access that from our script. And we've also done an invoke command. So several new things here I kind of threw at you in this video. But that's how we can build up kind of the groundwork for some features that we want to use in the future as well. So as always, thank you for watching. I hope you're finding this useful, and go ahead and leave me any questions that you have in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them as I'm able to. Have a great day.